Joining me in the studio now is the Premier of South Australia, Peter Malinauskas. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Thanks very much, Chris.
You know, the coalition federally is pushing for nuclear power. Now, to deliver that in this country, first they have to win government, but they won't be able to do it without a state government cooperating. Would South Australia be prepared to be the nuclear energy state?
Well, we are going to have a nuclear industry in South Australia, Chris, and it's one that my government supports and I certainly embrace, because only a few kilometres where we are right now, we're going to be building nuclear submarines, which is the most advanced of the technology as far as the nuclear fuel cycle goes. In terms of the civil power question, which is what the coalition federally are supporting, I think for me, I don't want to see a nuclear debate around civil use of for civil purposes being driven by ideology. The simple fact is we need nuclear power globally to decarbonise the energy sector, and that's good for South Australia because we're home to a significant uranium mine. So it's going to play a role. But whether or not it actually is going to make power prices cheaper or more expensive in this country is what I think we should be debating.
What if there's no risk for South Australia? What if it was a federal government saying that Port Augusta, for instance, could host a nuclear reactor? There would be no state government money required. The only possible impact in South Australia would be more energy available and this nuclear energy. Would you then be prepared to provide the legislative framework and the authorities for it to happen?
Not if it was going to make power more expensive, because someone's got to pay, Chris. And we've got a privatised power market in the national electricity market, which means the people who pay is the consumer. They pay down the cost of the infrastructure. They pay down the cost of the capital. And what we know from overseas experience, where we see nuclear power stations being built, the most recent one being in Georgia in the United States, was it cost $38 billion. Now, who's going to pay that $38 billion? It's going to end up being consumers. So I don't support a proposition that makes power more expensive.
But you've got the most expensive power in the country at the moment, and some of the most expensive power in the world. So you ought to be looking at ways that will underpin the energy security in this state.
Yeah, I believe in the role of gas within the electricity market in the South Australian context, in fact, in the Australian context. We have 75% of all our energy in South Australia now comes from renewable resources, particularly wind and solar, grid scale, but also rooftop on the home. And the way we make renewables competitive is to have firming services associated with it. And we believe in fast start gas generation to be able to do that, and that having a positive impact on the price of electricity in the national electricity market. But to try and recoup a $30 billion capital cost is only going to make power more expensive, and that's what all the independent analysis tells us.
So, well, your own previous Labor government in South Australia did a study, the Scarce Royal Commission, and he said if at capital cost of 6%, nuclear energy would be commercially viable in South Australia. Now, you could deliver capital cost at 6% now.
But what the Scarce Royal Commission also found is that in the current context, with the technologies that we know are available globally, that we do not see nuclear power being commercially competitive with the other sources of power that we have available to us. I mean, when we have the sun shining and the wind blowing in South Australia, Chris, we have so much supply that the price goes into net negative territory.
Sure, but the problem is that doesn't always happen, isn't it?
Of course.
The problem is security.
Of course.
And you can't fill in the gaps with storage.
But you can fill it in with gas, or in the long term, hydrogen-fired generators. And that's why we believe that gas has a role to play, which is far more economic than a nuclear solution.
All right, so you're open to the nuclear option, but it has to be just commercially viable.
Well, I think it would be reckless and irresponsible to impose upon Australians even more expensive power.
I want to go on to The Voice, because you've just had the first elections in this state for a state-based Indigenous voice. Given how emphatic the rejection of the constitutionally enshrined national voice was, both across the country and in your own state, it didn't give you pause to rethink whether or not people wanted this?
Yeah, it's a good question. We legislated our voice, which was the proposition that at one point Peter Dutton and the coalition were advocating for, to have a legislated voice rather than a constitutionally enshrined one. So we legislated our state-based voice to the Parliament at the beginning of last year, well in advance of the referendum. And it's exactly what we committed to the people of South Australia we would do. We've now had those elections. It's a non-binding advisory committee that will offer a view to the Parliament. And I don't see that being a wasteful exercise. I don't see it being a costly exercise. It is simply an opportunity for people to provide advice Whether or not the Parliament chooses to take it up will be another matter.
You've just had the elections, though, and less than 10% of those people eligible to vote for voice representatives actually turned out and voted. In one region, less than 200 people voted. Some people have been voted onto Indigenous voice committees with 6 or a dozen votes.
But
doesn't this mean that the whole thing will lack authority?
So the volume of votes that we saw was consummate to what we saw with ATSIC. So, we don't expect a turnout. There's not a high turnout. It's not compulsory voting. But more than that, Chris, what you refer to there aren't the people that are going to be speaking in the Parliament. The voice will have to choose 2 people only, one male, one female, who will be able to provide a voice to the Parliament. So there's still a substantial process that needs to be gone through before someone is eligible to actually make a contribution to the Parliament in that advisory way.
But doesn't that lack of buy-in, the incredibly small number of people who have bothered to cast a vote, mean that whoever speaks in Parliament won't really have the authority of representing Indigenous people in the state?
Well, we think they will have a degree of authority because it will be a democratically chosen body who simply can offer advice to the Parliament. Now, what's the alternative, Chris? The alternative is that we don't have a forum where Aboriginal people provide advice on policy that affects them. And how far has that got us so far? We don't see the gap being closed, and we know that needs work. Now, I don't suggest for one moment that having an advisory body fixes every problem, but I don't think it can do any harm, and particularly a legislated one, which means that in the future it'll be open to governments, mine or others, to amend it, choose to recalibrate it if they think there are deficiencies within it, which is why it's so fundamentally different to what was being proposed federally, which is a constitutionally enshrined model. That meant, of course, once it was there, it would always be there.
Now, you haven't finished one term of Parliament yet. You just won a by-election where the former Premier left his seat, and you've pinched that seat from him, the Labor Party winning that seat. So you're travelling very well. Some of the major bank surveys say the South Australian economy is the best in the country at the moment. I can't remember that happening in my lifetime. You're travelling pretty well. Has anyone from Canberra knocked on your door and asked whether you might want to switch to federal politics at some stage?
Honestly, Chris, I feel, and I don't want to sound cliche, but I feel so privileged having this responsibility. The state is in a really good spot, and we do have a degree of momentum. I mean, you'll be familiar with South Australia's economic history, Chris. 12 years ago, people were desperately concerned about how South Australians were going to find work in the future when we lost the car industry. And now we've got the lowest unemployment rate in the country. So but we see that momentum being able to be built upon to set us up for the long term, and that's what I'm committed to, is this job is big enough as it is.
Well, let's talk footy, because Adelaide and South Australia are the centre of the footy world this weekend with the Gather Round. I was here for last year's inaugural Gather Round. An idea, to be fair, kind of pinched from the NRL. Yep. It worked brilliantly last year, and the vibe in Adelaide this year is incredible. You must be wrapped with this whole event. There are already other states sort of enviously eyeing it off and saying they want to pinch it.
We are, and we're grateful for the partnership we've got with the AFL, but I'm actually more grateful to the people from interstate who are coming here to make it happen. The event only works because of people, Chris, right? So we could put all 18 clubs in the one place at the one time and that'll make it unique, but unless people travel to enjoy it, it doesn't have the magic. And our city and our state comes alive over the course of these next few days, and we're really proud of that. The thing that's most important to me is the economic opportunity and the platform it presents for us to show South Australia to the rest of the country in a different light.
There's something else you mentioned at the Gather Round function last night that really interested me, because it's something that I think about and talk about a lot, and that is the role of Aussie rules bringing people together. Yeah. It's an incredibly egalitarian sport. Yeah. There'll be as many women as men at the Adelaide Oval tonight. There'll be people from all ethnic backgrounds, all creeds. They share this game like no other. And you said last night this is important. Aussie rules is important now because we've got such a polarised political debate.
We've got to learn as a country to make sure we've still got the ability to disagree, agree, and do it civilly. And footy gives us a mechanism to do that. You're a passionate Crows man. I'm a diehard Port man.
And we speak.
Yeah, exactly. And people, we've got to make sure that we don't end up in the United States where, Republican voters move to Republican states and Democratic voters move to Democratic states. We are one country, and we've got to learn to agree to disagree. And footy is just this beautiful mechanism that brings people together as a unique code that no one else owns apart from our country. And I think that's worthy of celebration. In fact, I think it's worthy of investment. And Gather Round does something unique in that regard.
Well, let's hope the Crows get a win tonight, and I hope you have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, Chris.